The orphanage wave of the 1850s is typically explained as a humanitarian response to industrialization. Children left vulnerable by factory accidents, cholera outbreaks, and urban poverty needed care. Charitable organizations stepped in. But between 1848 and 1862, over 1,200 dedicated orphan asylums were constructed across the United States and United Kingdom. Most were built within a 7-year window. The average facility held between 200 and 400 children. Capacity exceeded 300,000 beds by 1860. In cities whose total child populations often numbered fewer than 10,000. The buildings appeared faster than the demographic need. Identical floor plans. Identical administrative structures. Identical funding models. This is a documentary exploration of observable infrastructure patterns. Not speculation. Not accusation. Just the architecture, the timing, and the scale. The first thing you notice when examining mid-19th century orphanage records is uniformity. The Boston Asylum for Indigent Boys, completed in 1851, featured a 4-story central hall flanked by residential wings. Heating via steam. Water via pressurized pipes. Capacity, 340 children. The Liverpool Industrial School for Destitute Children, opened in 1852, used an identical layout. 4 stories. Central hall. Residential wings. Steam heat. Pressurized water. Capacity, 360 children. The Philadelphia House of Refuge, finished in 1850, followed the same template. The Manchester Ragged School and Asylum, the Baltimore Orphan Asylum, the Leeds Industrial Feeding School, same design, same infrastructure, same organizational chart. Not similar. Identical. These weren't local responses to local problems. They were deployments of a pre-existing system. The architectural plans didn't evolve over time. They arrived complete. And they arrived everywhere at once. Construction records reveal something else. The Boston facility broke ground in March 1850. Foundation complete by June. Structural frame finished by October. Full occupancy by April 1851. 13 months start to finish. This was a 60,000 square foot building. 4 stories. Brick and stone. Central heating. Internal plumbing. Dormitories, kitchens, infirmaries, classrooms, workshops. Built in 13 months using mid-19th century construction methods. The Liverpool School was completed in 11 months. Philadelphia in 14. Baltimore in 12. These timelines weren't unusual. They were standard. For comparison, a typical residential home in the same period took 18 to 24 months to complete. Orphanages, structures 5 to 10 times larger, were finished faster. The labor forces required were enormous. Yet records show no unusual hiring spikes. No imported craftsmen. No delays. The buildings simply appeared on schedule across multiple cities, often simultaneously. Funding patterns follow a similar structure. Most orphanages were funded through a combination of municipal bonds, private endowments, and religious organizations. But the amounts involved were far beyond the capacity of individual cities. The Boston facility cost $47,000, roughly $1.8 million today. Liverpool School cost £12,000, equivalent to over $2 million in modern terms. Philadelphia's house cost $52,000. These figures weren't raised locally. Funding came through centralized networks. In the US, the American Sunday School Union coordinated much of the capital. In the UK, the Ragged School Union handled distribution. Both organizations appeared in the 1840s. Both had nationwide reach within 5 years. Both operated with administrative structures far more developed than their stated missions required. The speed of their expansion mirrored the speed of orphanage construction. Infrastructure and funding mechanisms arrived together, fully formed. Population records from the period add friction. In 1850, Boston's total population was approximately 136,000. The number of orphaned or destitute children, according to municipal surveys, was estimated at 800 to 1,200. The city built capacity for 340 children in a single facility, then built 2 more within 5 years. Total capacity by 1855, over 900 beds. Liverpool's child poverty population in 1851 was estimated at 1,400. The city constructed facilities for 1,100 children by 1860. Philadelphia had an estimated 2,000 orphan children in 1850. By 1862, institutional capacity exceeded 2,400. The ratio doesn't align. Cities were building infrastructure for populations that didn't yet exist, or for populations larger than official records indicated. And the buildings weren't small-scale experiments. They were permanent, large-scale institutions designed for long-term operation. The architectural over-engineering is difficult to ignore. Orphanages from this period featured advanced plumbing systems, pressurized water, waste evacuation, dedicated bathing facilities. Most urban homes in the 1850s lacked indoor plumbing. Yet orphanages had it as standard. Heating systems were equally advanced. Steam radiators, centralized boilers, duct ventilation. These weren't common in residential or even commercial buildings until the 1870s. Kitchens were industrialized. Large-scale ovens, mechanized mixers, cold storage. Fire suppression systems. Ventilation hoods. Infirmaries included quarantine wards, surgical rooms, observation areas. Medical infrastructure on par with urban hospitals, except orphanages were built faster and in greater numbers. The level of infrastructure didn't match the stated purpose. If the goal was simply to house and feed orphan children, the buildings were vastly overbuilt, unless they were designed for something beyond immediate need. Administrative records introduce another layer. Orphanages operated with detailed record-keeping systems. Intake logs, health assessments, educational progress reports, behavioral tracking, discharge documentation. The level of bureaucratic detail was unusual for the period. Most governmental institutions didn't standardize record-keeping until the 1870s or later. Yet orphanages had it from day one. Every child received a file number. Every interaction was logged. Every movement tracked. The systems weren't developed over time. They were implemented immediately, uniformly, across all facilities. The administrative templates came from somewhere. They were pre-designed, pre-formatted, and they were identical across regions. The question isn't whether the buildings were built. They were. The records are clear. The question is why they were built so quickly, so uniformly, with such advanced infrastructure, before the populations they were meant to serve had fully materialized. The pattern becomes harder to dismiss when you track infrastructure backward. The Erie Canal opened in 1825. It connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean through 363 miles of engineered waterway. The project took 8 years and required moving 14 million cubic yards of earth, using hand tools, horses, and black powder. But the canal wasn't designed for the population that existed in 1825. It was designed for the population that would exist in 1850. By the time orphanages were being built at scale, the Erie Canal was already operating at capacity. The rail networks that followed used the same logic. Build first, populate later. The orphanage system fits into this sequence. Advanced infrastructure appearing before demographic demand, then demand arriving to meet it. Britain's rail expansion followed an identical curve. Between 1845 and 1850, over 6,000 miles of railway were constructed across England, Scotland, and Wales. This period is known as railway mania. Tracks were laid through rural areas with populations too small to justify the investment. The financing came through a centralized system of parliamentary acts and private capital. Construction crews moved from region to region using standardized methods. Stations, signals, bridges, all built to uniform specifications. The orphanages appeared during the same window. Same financing model. Same administrative coordination. Same construction speed. And like the railways, the orphanages were overbuilt for their immediate context. The Great Northern Railway completed a station in Peterborough in 1850. It was designed to handle 12 trains per day. In 1850, only 3 trains per day stopped there. By 1860, 12 did. The Liverpool Orphanage opened with space for 360 children. Initial intake was 140. By 1862, occupancy reached 350. The infrastructure preceded the population it was meant to serve. Not by accident. By design. Water systems tell the same story. Philadelphia's Fairmount Water Works began operation in 1815. It was the first large-scale municipal water system in the United States. The system could supply 3 million gallons per day. Philadelphia's population in 1815 was roughly 53,000 people. Daily water consumption at the time averaged 10 gallons per person. The city needed 530,000 gallons per day. Fairmount was built with capacity for over 300,000 people. The population didn't reach that level until 1850, 35 years later. London's water infrastructure followed a parallel timeline. The New River Company expanded its supply capacity in the 1820s and 1830s, delivering water volumes far exceeding contemporary demand. Population growth caught up by the 1850s. By the time orphanages were being constructed, both cities already had water systems capable of supporting large institutions. The infrastructure was waiting. The orphanages plugged into systems that had been prepared in advance. Storage infrastructure adds another dimension. Grain elevators in Buffalo, New York, were operational by the 1840s. These were massive vertical storage systems capable of holding hundreds of thousands of bushels. They were built to handle grain shipments from the Midwest, before Midwest grain production had scaled to match. The first elevator, completed in 1843, could store 55,000 bushels. Buffalo's grain traffic in 1843 was under 20,000 bushels annually. By 1855, traffic exceeded 5 million bushels. The infrastructure had been waiting. Coal storage facilities in Liverpool operated on the same principle. Built in the 1830s, they were designed for industrial volumes that wouldn't arrive until the 1850s. The orphanages appeared at the intersection of these systems. They required water, coal, food supply chains, waste removal, medical supplies. All of these logistical networks were already in place, oversized and underutilized, by the time the orphanages came online. The timing suggests coordination, not conspiracy. Coordination. Someone was building for a future they expected. Administrative similarity becomes impossible to ignore. Orphanages in Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and Glasgow all used the same operational manual. Not similar manuals. The same manual. It was called the System of Moral and Religious Instruction for Destitute Youth. Published in 1847 by the American Sunday School Union and co-adopted by the Ragged School Union in Britain. The manual specified daily schedules, educational curricula, disciplinary procedures, health protocols, and record-keeping formats. It was 340 pages long. It covered every operational detail, and it was distributed before most of the orphanages existed. The manual didn't emerge from trial and error. It wasn't revised over time. It arrived complete and institutions implemented it immediately. This level of pre-planning is unusual. It suggests the system was designed in advance, then deployed. Architectural consistency extends to details most people never notice. Window placement. Orphanages from this period placed windows at specific intervals, every 12 feet on residential floors, every 8 feet in common areas. This wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a ventilation standard. Ceiling heights were uniform. 12 feet in dormitories, 14 feet in halls, 10 feet in basements. Stairwell widths were identical. 6 feet for main stairs, 4 feet for service stairs. Door dimensions matched across facilities. 7 feet tall, 3 feet wide for main entries. 6.5 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide for internal doors. These weren't best practices that evolved. They were specifications that appeared simultaneously. The level of standardization suggests a central design authority, but no such authority is documented in historical records. The plans simply existed, and they were implemented everywhere at once. Cross-regional construction timelines reveal something else. In 1852, 5 major orphanages broke ground within a 6-week period. Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Liverpool, Manchester. All 5 used identical blueprints. All 5 sourced materials through similar supply chains. All 5 completed construction within 14 months. Labor forces didn't overlap. Craftsmen weren't transferred between sites. Yet the timelines synchronized. The only explanation is pre-coordination. Materials, labor, and capital were arranged in advance. Construction didn't begin until all elements were in position. This requires planning on a scale beyond individual cities or charitable organizations. It requires systemic organization. And it requires infrastructure that was already waiting. Financial records show another layer of synchronization. Bonds issued to fund orphanage construction were often underwritten by the same financial institutions. In the US, the Girard Bank in Philadelphia handled funding for multiple cities. In Britain, Barclays coordinated capital for several regional projects. These weren't local banks. They were national institutions with international reach. They moved capital across regions in ways that didn't become common until decades later. The financial infrastructure was already centralized. The orphanages tapped into it. By the 1860s, the system was complete. Hundreds of institutions, uniform design, synchronized administration, integrated into water, rail, and supply networks that had been overbuilt for exactly this purpose. Whether this reflects inherited planning or convergent development becomes the central question. The infrastructure suggests preparation, the timing suggests deployment, and the scale suggests something larger than local response. The orphanages weren't built in isolation. They were the final pieces of a system that had been assembling for decades. The term Tartaria originates from European maps dating back to the 16th century. It referred to a vast region of Central Asia, lands beyond the Ottoman Empire, east of the Caspian, stretching toward Mongolia and Siberia. The name appears on cartographic records through the 1800s, denoting geographic space, not political empire. By the early 20th century, the term had faded from common use. Soviet reorganization, updated geography, and changing terminology replaced it. In recent years, Tartaria has been reinterpreted, not as a geographic label, but as a framework for examining infrastructure patterns that appear coordinated across regions and timelines. It's become shorthand for a hypothesis that certain systems, railways, water networks, institutional buildings, reflect inherited design rather than independent development. This interpretation is debated. It's not academically mainstream, but it's used as a lens to examine observable anomalies in 19th century construction and administration. The orphanage network fits within this framework, not because it proves anything, but because it raises the same questions. Three interpretive models exist. The first is conventional. Industrialization created need, and charitable organizations responded with coordinated efficiency. Advances in construction, finance, and communication allowed rapid deployment of standardized systems. The uniformity reflects best practices spreading quickly across regions. This model accounts for the speed and scale through technological progress and social organization. It requires no external explanation. The second model suggests inherited infrastructure. That certain building techniques, administrative systems, and urban planning methods were preserved from earlier periods and redeployed during the 19th century. The uniformity reflects continuity, not innovation. This model interprets Tartaria as a placeholder for an earlier phase of development, one that left behind knowledge, blueprints, or organizational frameworks that were later implemented. The third model emphasizes systemic coordination, that the orphanages, railways, water systems, and financial networks were elements of a planned expansion, not inherited, but designed in advance by institutions with long-term vision. The uniformity reflects centralized planning executed across decades. This model doesn't require a lost civilization. It requires only that 19th century institutions operated with more foresight and coordination than is typically acknowledged. All three models can coexist. None are mutually exclusive. Return to 1816. That year, global temperatures dropped. Volcanic eruptions in the preceding years, particularly Mount Tambora in 1815, ejected ash into the atmosphere. Crops failed. Famine spread. Migration patterns shifted. The demographic pressures that defined the mid-19th century began here. Orphan populations surged in the 1820s and 1830s. Poverty intensified. Urban migration accelerated. By the 1840s, the infrastructure response began. Not reactive, prepared. The systems that came online in the 1850s weren't emergency measures. They were deployments. Water, rail, institutions, all elements of a framework that had been designed to handle exactly this kind of pressure. Whether that framework was inherited, planned, or emergent depends on interpretation. But the timing suggests anticipation. The term Tartaria functions as metaphor in this context. It's a way of naming something difficult to name, the sense that 19th century infrastructure feels older than it should. That the systems appeared too complete, too fast, too uniform. It's not about proving a lost empire. It's about acknowledging that the official narrative, industrialization led to innovation, which led to construction, doesn't fully explain the scale, speed, and synchronization. The orphanages are one example. They're documentable, measurable, real. And they fit into a larger pattern of infrastructure that seems designed for populations that hadn't yet arrived. The evidence invites examination, not conclusions. The buildings exist. The records exist. The timelines are clear. What remains unclear is whether the uniformity reflects inheritance, coordination, or convergent efficiency. Each model offers explanatory power. Each leaves questions unresolved. The orphanage network wasn't hidden. It was documented, funded, and publicly operated. Yet the scale and synchronization suggest something beyond local charitable response. Whether that something is institutional foresight, inherited knowledge, or systemic planning depends on which framework you find most compelling. The architecture doesn't answer the question. It only makes the question unavoidable. The buildings are still standing. Many have been repurposed: schools, museums, apartment complexes. The infrastructure remains embedded in modern cities. You can visit them, walk the halls, measure the ceilings, examine the plumbing. The evidence is physical, tangible, present, and it continues to resist simple explanation.